The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. We enjoyed talking to our founder and benefactor, Paul Asadorian, in the first segment. In this segment, we are going to do what we don't always get a chance to do, but take a look at some of the news stories that are out there that are related to security and compliance. It's funny, we've been joking on the other shows that, given the lockdown and how the whole world has been sort of interrupted, a lot of the media and press seem to be really, let's say, scraping the barrel for trying to come up with exciting news stories. It seems like compliance is a hot topic to beat up on, as we'll see in some of the news stories this week. But first, we do have a couple announcements. Join us at InfoSec World 2020. It has been rescheduled for June 22nd through 24th. Fingers crossed that we actually get to do it. It's at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. Security Weekly listeners can save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. To get that discount, you visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the registration button to register. Use our discount code, or you can click the schedule button to sponsor a micro interview. Also, we're putting an appeal out to our audience. We are looking for high quality guest suggestions for our Enterprise Security Weekly podcast to fill our upcoming recording schedule. We're committed, of course, to educating and providing entertainment. We are committed to providing educational and entertaining information for the InfoSec community, and we would love to hear from you about who you would like us to interview on the show. You can submit your suggestions for Enterprise or any of our shows, frankly, by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and filling out the form. We review these suggestion forms on a monthly basis, and we'll get back to you once we've determined whether we're going to follow up or not. All righty. Stories in the news. I do a Google search when we do this on security, compliance, and breach news. The stories that popped for me, it seems like there was a lot of stories related to, and I'm paraphrasing, compliance sucks, compliance isn't security, sort of reinforcing all the things that we're trying to educate and enlighten our listening audience on why security and compliance are kind of a thing that play together. But are there any stories for you guys that kind of jumped out that you want to lead with? I have my stories, but whatever.
Can I talk about the theme of those stories that you put up there? Because
sure.
The theme, which you just mentioned, was, security and compliance are totally separate, and increased security, increased spending on compliance doesn't do anything for security, and that kind of thing. And I kind of want to address that. We did talk about that with Paul in the last segment, where security and compliance have I think you put it as a complicated relationship.
Yep. If it was Facebook, it's complicated, right?
God, we need to do that as a t-shirt. Oh, that's so beautiful.
That's it.
That's the t-shirt we need to do. But anyway,
there we go.
And I would be totally cool with that, and I'd buy one. But I think the biggest thing is that compliance and security are not the same thing, but they are symbiotic. They are in a relationship, and it is complicated. But it doesn't mean that increased spending on security will help your compliance or vice versa. It doesn't mean that if you decrease your security, you'll decrease your compliance or vice versa. What it means is that an intelligent strategy of leveraging your compliance to work your security budget, an intelligent leveraging of your security personnel to help your compliance people fill out the proper forms and do the right things properly. Leveraging of each other is how you synchronize them, how you make them better together and apart.
Right.
That's my take on it.
It's funny. It's funny. It's almost like somebody needs to build a either a Pareto chart or a Pareto curve of the amount of money, right? The amount of security, the amount of compliance, right? And base it against a vertical to say, okay, well, if you are a business making this much in either MRR or ARR, right? You should be spending this much on security, this much on compliance for this amount of protection.
But they did.
Right? Did they?
Yeah,
There's been research
God, I
and
forget
books
who
done
did
on
it. Does
this.
anybody know? It was like you should be putting up. I'm sorry.
We just interviewed Dick Clark, who just did a whole big research on this in his book, The Fifth Domain. He said, look, if you're
American
good at
Bandstand,
security
Dick
and you're
Clark?
cyber resilient, you got to be spending 8 to 10% of your IT budget on security. And if you're not, you're not there.
Matt, that's
right?
perfect.
He lays out the 3 characteristics, right? So people have done this type of research. The problem is, unless you're in the financials, most people outside the financials aren't spending that level of money on security.
And corresponding money on compliance. And it's interesting. You can actually take your revenue. I mean, I have it in my head. It's of your annual revenue, you should be spending, I think it's 8 to 10% on IT. Of that number, you should be spending about 3 to 7% on IT security, and roughly corresponding, I forget the corresponding number for compliance. So it's a lot of money, and it's a big chunk of your revenue.
Yeah, but shouldn't
does that actually
compliance and
give you
security
a
spend?
secure environment? And the answer is, of course not. Nothing's 100% secure. Nothing's 100% compliant. But it provides you a significant level of security. You're much higher up the tree. Am I vaguely correct about that, Matt?
Yeah,
I'd be curious about that study. I'm sorry, Matt. I'd be curious about that study just in terms of, so you come up with a number. I'm not going to dispute the number. Let's round it off and say 10%.
Okay.
My question then is, what exactly falls into that bucket? What is that? Where does that 10% get spent? And does it?
That's your personnel. That's your personnel, your tools, your applications, your systems, your hardware. It's a percentage of like your firewalls and such. It's not your routers. It's not your strictly networking devices, but your security devices, firewalls, security appliances, things like that. They're all inside of that budget. Does that make sense?
I think it varies. I don't think there's a standard formula of how that money's spent in any organization, because some people might be heavily on-prem and others might be heavily remote, right? And so how you spend that doesn't matter. But he identified 3 characteristics that created a cyber resilient company. What does that mean? That means a company could withstand an attack and not become the next breach that's in the news cycle. And he said there are 3 things. He said there's a good governance structure, there's a culture from the top down in security, and you're spending the appropriate amount of money. And if you do those, you are in a better position than anybody else to be resilient against an attack, regardless of how it happens. So, like I said, he's done some of this research. It was at 8 to 10% IT security spend is what he saw as kind of the threshold. But because I asked him specifically, we interviewed him a few weeks ago on Business Security Weekly. I said, outside of financials, who's there? And he said, there's not very many. That's the problem.
Well, and that sort of is reflective, Matt, of what we generically refer to very often as sort of the maturity of security organizations. In the early days, back in the beginning of the whole let's everybody jump on the internet bandwagon, the companies where it made sense to do security was largely financial institutions, under the presumption that the bad guys are going to try to steal money. And where is the money? It's with financial institutions. So early on, those companies took security more seriously, and of course, there was a lot of regulation and compliance that was put behind them. I had customers 20 some odd years ago. One in particular that was a banking financial institution, but they were sort of the middleman, transferring the funds on not necessarily on the internet, but private networks. But they were pushing trillions of dollars a day, so they were a big player. Obviously, they spent a lot. I would be interested, first of all, to get the either the link to the segment we can sort of cross-pollinate and let our readers find that. But whatever the report or document that was produced, presumably there's some sort of documentation. If we can get that link, I would like to read it. But the number 3 that you said being the appropriate amount of spend, I'm still intrigued by what are you spending. You can spend a lot of money and spend it on the wrong things. So I'd be curious to see how much detail there is in terms of sort of the quality of the spend. Where do you invest your money in? And certainly from the vendor side, the commercial side of security, that where everybody is trying to sell something and make a buck and make a living and so on and so forth, everybody's competing for your dollars. I saw that back years ago when I used to work for a startup and I was running a consulting practice, essentially a pen testing practice, where we were very often competing against dollars where our prospective customers would say, well, we would love to have you come in and help us, but we need to be able to show some value for our spend. And that translated to we needed to buy product. There was an old saying, I don't know if it still applies today, nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. That they were the big players, that they were the I don't know what's the modern corollary? Help me out, guys. But
nobody got fired for buying Cisco either, probably, right? I mean, you can say that about any big company, but don't look at IBM's earnings results, because obviously nobody listens to that one anymore.
But so the quality of spend, where do you spend your money? You can spend a lot of money and not be more secure.
I agree with you, Jeff. I mean, how you spend that money, look, you could spend it all on firewalls and still be completely owned, right? So you're right. There is how you spend that money and where you spend that money. And I think that's going to vary by organizations. He's just saying that there are characteristics of companies that are in a better position than others, and part of that is spend and how much they spend. We didn't get into details about where that's spent, but there are some things in the book that he talks about around identity. I've said this for a while, and I'll keep saying it until people just understand. App user data. Applications, users, and how they access data are the core elements of data of security. We were talking about data before, credit card data, PII. It's all about data. What's accessing that data? Humans, people, maybe machines, and definitely applications, right? And so, I want people to realize how much are they spending on application security, identity and user security, and data security, because that's where they should be spending the money. That's what we're trying to protect. And if you can use that as a guideline, then at least you can look at where you're spending money and say, am I spending too much money here, and here, and not spending enough money on these more core items? That's where I would make kind of my investment decisions in an organization, but it's going to vary.
I think, and I know one of the, you mentioned spend as the third thing. I think it was the second one you said was more, and I'm paraphrasing, corporate culture or
culture. Yeah, it's a culture of security coming from the top down.
And what was number one?
Governance model.
Okay. So organization governance, I would tend to think that the corporate culture, even though he ranked it as number 2, I think that's what drives everything. Is just, we call it maturity, we call it industry, but it all at the end of the day, it boils down to within an organization, whether you have some sort of clue about what it is that you have that's valuable that you need to protect, and are you doing something about it, whether somebody's telling you or making you do it from a compliance regulatory perspective, or whether it's just the right thing to do. I think that what's unique about financial institutions, because we tend to point to those as the most mature organizations, A, because they've been regulated the longest, but I think B, because it was well understood early on that bad guys want to steal money. That's the opportunity here. And these are the people that handle the money, process and transfer the money. So they're the likely targets. So they at least to some degree, they got that they were a likely target. So they knew that they needed to invest in security. But I think that's a cultural decision that drives their spend, if that makes
There
sense.
was some, I think that's true, Jeff. I think there was an incentive in the regulation to also do the right things. Because what Graham Leach Bliley did was opened up the financial sector to a lot of things they were not allowed to do, insurance and investments and brokerages and all kinds of other stuff. There were some incentives from a revenue model in Graham Leach Bliley in allowing banks to do more in some of these other spaces. And so there was an upside for them to do the right things too, especially with the regulators, to drive revenue. Where if you look at other regulations, there's usually no carrot, it's just a stick, right? And I think that also makes what Graham Leach Bliley did to the financials pretty unique from a regulatory perspective.
Right. And as we've covered on previous episodes, cyber insurance is not one of those things that you want.
Yeah.
Right. Not that you don't want it. It's just in finishing the thought, we were talking about all of these different things that you could potentially put money towards, the compliance regimes, this, that, and the other. And remember, cyber insurance is not the answer, right? Cyber insurance covers you if something goes wrong, but cyber insurance is not the end all be all. Yeah, it's not the replacement. And that actually dovetails really well into one of these articles in here. The why compliance is for guidance, not a security strategy. I was reading through here, and Jason Frug, who I would love to see us get on this show, right? Goes through and starts writing about everything that we know and trying to relate it into a new concept, right? And one of the key important points is that he's saying that strategy is, a security and or compliance strategy needs to be fit for your business, right? More oftentimes than not, we as owners and whatnot sit back and say, well, compliance is just a checkbox, right? And the answer is it's not, right? And we need to stop looking at it as a checkbox. Right. But what it really comes down to is realizing the level of risk, right, or the level of technical debt that a company is incurring by making sure that they don't have a low to medium maturity of security in place in their org, rather than having none or trying to bury your head in the sand like your damn ostrich. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I did. I also pulled in some privacy ones around this new contact tracing app. A lot of news on this thing over the last week or so, because places like Singapore implemented this in their environment. There's been discussions about these apps coming into the U.S. and to be used. We were talking about the big tech companies and privacy and how do you get them protect the data, and then they want to trust these contact tracing apps. I'm not quite sure I trust them. I'm not quite sure I want to give them access to some of this data, because I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with it.
Are you saying the government might not have your best interest at heart? Oh my goodness.
I know that.
Real
I know
quickly,
that
Mac.
About as bad. Well, it's just about as bad as going on Facebook and you seeing all of these chain posts. Because we're home, we want to try and fill our time and let other people know about us. I mean, there's social media, right? All of these chain posts about your name as a child, where you were born, right? Or like the places that I never went to as a kid, right? Like it's all social engineering, and a lot of people don't understand, because they want to say, well, I want to see all of this information, but they don't understand what they're giving up in exchange for it, right?
Yeah, and
I want to release it.
Same potential boat, right?
Please, for the love of God, don't do it on Facebook. Please do not put that on Facebook. Stay away from that stuff.
Thus says Scott. Hey, real quickly, Matt, could you just briefly define what a contact tracing app is and does?
Well, what these apps are intended to do is you download them onto your phone, you put the app on your phone, and it uses Bluetooth to identify who you're getting close in contact to other people that have the app. So it's supposedly using Bluetooth to do that. And so what it's doing is it's kind of tracking movements of people and who they're in proximity to. So when they see somebody get infected, they can now say, oh, here's all the potential people they were in contact with. And it's supposed to be a way to really potentially warn when you're getting close to somebody and or allow them to look at how infections are actually occurring. So Singapore rolled this application out, I think, to everybody. I don't think it was voluntary. I think it was pretty mandatory.
You're right.
Rolled
Yeah, it was.
this application out to kind of monitor what was happening from an infection perspective. Now there's talk about potentially using this app to reopen aspects of the U.S. government. And I'm sitting there looking at it going, wait a minute. First of all, the information in that app I don't trust anybody having, whether it's Apple, Google, whoever, I don't care. I said, then it's using Bluetooth, and there's known vulnerabilities in Bluetooth communication. So now I've got this vulnerable potential app running on my phone. I'm just like, I don't want to deal with it. But the one article says it's very specific. Citizens must trust contact tracing apps or they will fail.
They must.
Yeah, I'm sorry, then it's going to fail because I don't trust it.
All I can say is I'm pretty sure that the movie Minority Report is available on Netflix. I watched it again just in the last week or so because what else do I have to do but watch movies? I've always been fascinated by the concept behind the movie Minority Report. So if you haven't seen the movie, watch it.
Yeah, it's like modern day, right? I mean, it's like it predicted aspects of this where we are today. It's kind of interesting.
Oh, it really did. Even to a lesser degree, I'm geeking out because all I'm doing is watching movies. The old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Total Recall. In the sense that there's monitoring sensors everywhere that identify your movements. They understand your buying habits. So in the context of both movies, they're like, as you're walking through a mall, they're throwing up customized advertising for you based on your, whatever information they've collected on you. But the concept is it's classic sci-fi, but we're living it today.
So, Jeff, I'm going to quote a movie. Tell me if you know
Please.
Would you like to know more?
Matrix?
Starship Troopers.
Okay.
And it's because as they were walking, the holograms projected at them were, hey, Johnny, there's a great steak shop down the road. Would you like to know more? Type of thing. I mean, it was the customized advertisement. I mean, what was it, 10 years ago? Motorola had a Bluetooth system so that if you walked into the store, a coupon would show up on your phone because you were a great customer of the store because it could recognize your phone. That quickly went out of fashion because people were like, this is creepy. Get it the hell out of here. I'm never coming back.
Right.
I mean,
hey, shifting gears real quick, I'll probably add this to Security Weekly's news segment and we'll talk about it there. But I'm interested in getting your guys' perspective. I think it came out just in the last day or two. Cognizant, pretty big company. They got hit by ransomware. They got hit by Maze ransomware. In the context of security and compliance, what are your thoughts on when large companies that are supposed to be the ones that are promoting all this security and compliance get hit by something like a ransomware attack?
Well, I mean, so let's first talk about what did Cognizant do? What is Cognizant as a company? Okay. Mm-hmm. They are they're an AI engineering strategy company for several different verticals. Do you know which verticals they worked on? I don't remember off the top of my head.
I just see their name pop up a lot.
Yeah,
they're at RSA. They're at Black Hat.
I think they're kind of one of those like they're everywhere type of companies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They do all kinds of things. They're basically a high-end IT consulting shop, as I understand it. And I mean, they'd probably yell at me because they do security, they do IT, they do engineering, they do all sorts of stuff. But as I understand it, they're a very high-end IT, engineering, cloud, all kinds of things consulting shop, and they'll come in and help you with their stuff. So what that means to me is they have tie-ins to huge amounts of clients. Now, I don't know how big they are. I assume they're a multi-billion-dollar company, because that's who those big companies are these days. But if they have tie-ins to the IT end of those clients, it's potential that some of those clients could also get infected with the ransomware. I don't know that.
Right.
I know that MSPs, managed service providers, have been a huge target for a lot of ransomware purveyors, if you will, because of just that. They can get not just one company, they can get 30, 50, 100, whatever. The ransomware just propagates massively. So if Cognizant got whacked with Maze and their clients got whacked with Maze, I wouldn't be surprised to see some lawsuits happening very, very quickly.
So Cognizant is a $28.11 billion market cap publicly traded company. Their stocks,
thank you, Mr. Businessman.
Down. It's actually up over, I mean, if you look at it, it's kind of overall, it kind of mirrors the rest of the market, but it is down a little bit today, down a buck and change.
Well, I mean, ignore the stock price, because as we've seen, actually getting hacked,
it doesn't matter. I know.
So
yeah,
there's a stock market,
Target, all these guys.
It'll go down a point or two, and
like
then it'll come back up.
Today,
Target
Jeff,
lost 2.5% after being hacked, and then they came up 6%, I think it was.
Yeah.
So don't worry about their stock price. But the question is, will they get sued by clients if their clients get whacked by Maze? And how will those suits go?
Does that part of that 8 to 10% spend include litigation, fines, and settling lawsuits?
I don't know
Really
about
good
y'all,
question.
but I totally want to be a fly on the wall when they have the discussion with their insurance company about this.
It's Chubb, I think, one of the big insurers. Yeah.
I wanted to point out, just on a lighter note, shift gears. Scott had posted a link to, I guess, memes and cartoons that are related to compliance that are on Pinterest. I kind of question why Scott's got a link to anything on Pinterest, but that's another topic for another day. But
wait, what?
I did LOL on a couple of these things. So if you want to like,
actually, but that's okay.
Oh, that was you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that wasn't me.
Josh, that makes so much more sense, because I can totally see Josh on Pinterest way before Scott.
Oh, Josh is totally a Pinterest person.
Yeah.
What can I say? Pinterest has great stuff. Come on.
He's embroidering and knitting booties for his little baby and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's either that or the different photos of @Quadling Hat. You can go on Twitter @Quadling Hat and see it. Literally, his hat has its own Twitter handle.
But some of those things, I said, you asked about like stories that were interesting for relevant stuff, and I'm like, how about humor? And I went for compliance humor. I just Googled it and I found that page. I was dying laughing. They were awesome.
We're all a little bit punchy. Well, and I was laughing at a lot of them too, but for each one of them, like, okay, that's it's reinforcing a stereotype that we're trying to dispel and demystify on our show. So I mean, we could almost take one of these memes and make each one a topic for a show at some point. Maybe we'll do that. I don't know.
I find it really funny because right now, every single person who is following the stay in shelter rule during this whole COVID crap, everybody's following compliance.
Yeah, that's why I don't stay home.
You're not being compliant.
Yeah,
I'm not in compliance.
Well, you can go out. You just have to wear a mask and be socially distant and so on and so forth.
Was it?
I'm socially distant, yes. Masks are not required in the state of Colorado, so I do not wear a mask.
They are required in Maryland, so I do have my mask.
Yeah,
they're required in Pennsylvania and New York and all sorts of places now. California.
It came across Drudge Report earlier. I was sitting there reading it, and I'm like, oh, this ought to be interesting. There was a gentleman who was saying that the shelter in place was BS, that literally just passed away from COVID. And I'm like, why aren't you like, what's wrong with you? This kills people.
It kind of reminds me, and we'll close on this. If you've ever seen the original version of the movie Red Dawn, where at the very beginning, when the attack is commenced and they're showing some of the initial damage, the camera pans to a pickup truck, and on the pickup truck there's a bumper sticker that says, you can pry my gun from my cold dead hands, and then they pan down to the guy that's dead on the ground.
And the Russian officer pries the gun out of his hand. Yes,
and the gun is pried from his dead hand. On that, we will wrap up this episode for Security and Compliance Weekly. We've been a little bit scatterbrained, perhaps, but hopefully you found something, if not entertaining and educational, at least thought-provoking. Until next week, Jeff and all the gang, this is Security and Compliance Weekly. We are out.